Good morning, everyone. Feel free to stand and worship with us. We have a couple new ones this morning, so just try your best to sing along. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here.
Overwhelming
we wait for you. God, we wait, you're coming soon. So we wait for you. God, we wait, you're coming soon. Like a bride waiting for her groom, we'll be a church ready for you. Every heart longing for our King, we sing. Like a bride waiting for her groom, we'll be a church ready for you. Every heart longing for our King, we sing. Even so, come, Lord Jesus, come. Even so, come, Lord Jesus, come. Heavenly Father, we just thank you that we could all be here together this weekend and have the opportunity to worship you freely. And I just pray that you'd be with Carl and Denise as they share and just be with the rest of our day. Thank you for everything. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.
Thank you, worship team. As you were singing, the first song was Miracle Worker, Waymaker, and I was just thinking, that's probably what Carl and Denise was thinking a lot about over that time, that God was there for them, God helped them. So I just want to have a word of prayer before they come, and then they can come and share, and then I'll close the service. Dear God, we just thank you again for this time. Thank you for the worship time and just the meaningful songs that just, again, know that you are God and you're coming and you care for each of us. Lord, again, we just thank you for this time. I pray for Carl and Denise as they share. Lord, just open our hearts. Lord, just give them a peace as they share. Lord, just speak through them and just give them a good time as they share and just to reflect back on all that God has done for them. Bless this time in Jesus' name.
Good morning. The songs that they sang this morning were ones that came to mind as I was preparing. And if everybody just wants to continue worshiping with singing, I would be totally fine with that this morning. And if you were coming here this morning expecting to hear Carl speak, my sincerest apologies. We stood together before a congregation one time on May 21st, 2005, and it did not go well. He ended up on the floor, and so he is opting not to try that again. And I'm okay with that. But we have gone over this together, prepared together, and are thankful for the opportunity to share. Also, I will mention some names as we share our journey, and that's not to exclude people who are not mentioned by name. That would be impossible to include everybody, but there were some significant parts of our story that I felt names were to be shared. So last August, we were just wrapping up a week of VBS, and the last 3 years, actually, we have used group publishing, and they encourage the kids, staff too, everybody, to watch for God. The kids had bracelets last year that said watch for God that they wore all week, and we encourage them every day to come back with God sightings. What have you seen God doing? Where have you seen God? How have you seen his hand at work? And so that's something that for 3 years I've been working on doing as well, trying to practice in my own life. And what I have to share about our experience was something similar that we shared with the kids at VBS, that some things we see, we can just say, oh, well, that was fortunate. What a coincidence. Oh, how pretty is that in creation? But we firmly believe in an all-powerful God who's moving and working, and we need to give him credit for that. And so a lot of parts of our story, I felt like we could just say, well, that was a huge coincidence, or that was extremely fortunate that it turned out that way. Last August, the kids and I were also getting ready to start our study of the Red Sea to the Jordan with Community Bible Study. And CBS studies have always been very relatable for me. But last year, I just wasn't, I was excited to meet the ladies and to do this study, but it was an Old Testament study, and it was a familiar story. And I thought, how much more can we get out of the Israelites' desert wanderings? Skipping ahead just a little bit to October, it was week 6 of our study. And every week, CBS has the last section is an Apply the Truth section. And so that Sunday afternoon, I finished that lesson, and the Apply the Truth was this. God wanted Moses to share that his son, to make sure that his son and grandson were paying attention to the wonders God was performing. Why? Exodus 10:2, and it's parts of that. I've always done it so you can tell your children and your grandchildren, and so you will know that I am the Lord. What God stories do you have? How has God personally worked in your life and in the lives of your family? Make sure your children, your grandchildren, your extended family, and your friends know these stories. How and with whom could you share one of these stories? And I remember closing my book that day thinking, well, it's not that he hasn't done anything, but I really can't think of anything compelling for me that I need to be sharing with people right now. And very little did I know what our next morning would hold. October 14th, 2019 started like few other Monday mornings. For the last 10 months, Carl had kind of been in a routine of getting up in the middle of the night, anywhere from 12 to 2 to 4 to 6, way long before the kids and I would get up. And he would do a morning workout while his coffee was brewing, and he'd be off to work. And that Monday morning, he had no work, extremely unusual. And so he got up with the rest of us, and he was doing his morning workout while the kids were eating breakfast, and I was getting everything together for our Monday morning gymnastics class, and then we were headed off for a day trip with friends. God orchestrated that. If that morning had gone differently, as usual, I could have woken up to a very different scenario. The fact that we were all together that morning was a huge God sighting. Carl's workout was resistance bands, where you work to fatigue, or I guess that's what you call it. You work till exertion. And so his last rep was exertion, and he felt a sudden onset of pain in the sternum area. Like a typical man, if this had been a normal Monday morning, Carl would have probably laid on the floor and waited till it was too late, or left for work alone. But I found him on the floor of the living room in pain, holding his sternum, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? I have pain. And thought, okay. Went upstairs, gathered the rest of the stuff, thinking like, well, heart attack, I've never heard a pain this high. I don't know what it could possibly be while he's working out. This is strange. And so I came downstairs, and he had gotten his stuff, and he was headed to the car. And I thought, well, what a relief. That was short-lived. But he was getting in the passenger seat, and I am not normally the chauffeur for the professional driver of the family. And so I could tell that he was having a really hard time getting comfortable, and everything was not okay. And so I was trying to do what we do, Google, what does Google have to say about sternum pain after workouts? And of course, it was extremely clear in professional findings that Google had for me, ranging from a minor muscle pain to a heart attack to an aneurysm. And we headed towards Williamsport to the gym. And I was trying to evaluate him while driving, trying to determine if I was going to reroute to the closest ER, and chance being the drama queen that I am, and have a diagnosis of a pulled muscle and live with that, or what I should do. With every minute that we got down the road, I could tell that he was clearly in medical distress and worsening by the minute. And I asked him at one point if we needed to go to the ER, and he's like, I don't know. And well, that was not a no. And And by the time we got to the interchange with I-70, I said, "Can I please just call 911?" And he said, "Whatever." And that was a yes. And so my first frustration was I gave them the name of the gym where I wanted them to meet me at with the paramedics, and she couldn't find the address, and so I was trying to drive illegally on my handheld device looking for an address for a 4-star gym in Williamsport, and following a tractor trailer that would not get out of my way and was going way too slow. And at this point, I really felt like I was going to lose my husband. And my kids were in the back seat watching this unfold. Neither Carl or I will ever take the trip down the Greencastle Pike again without those details haunting us. But the paramedics did meet us in the parking lot of the gym that morning. It felt like the longest wait ever for them to get there, especially when you can hear the sirens coming the whole way through town and you know they're coming for your loved one. They found nothing wrong with Carl's heart based on their quick assessments that they could do, and so he was given the option to go home. Or obviously proceed to the ER. Of course, Carl thought he should just go home, and I thought otherwise. And so I said, well, he's loaded up, and something's not right, and so we're going to go to the ER. And okay. Again, we could have said that, well, it was very fortunate that we were to go to the gym that morning because we have several families that we meet at the gym every morning. My kids are very familiar with them. I'm familiar with them and feel comfortable with them. They were there to take care of my kids. I could leave for the ER following the paramedics. My kids were taken care of. My mom and my sister were working together that morning. I called them and they were immediately on their way, or texted them. And so it was all details that I believe God had worked out. It was not just by chance. We were in the midst of an emergency, and God had the places and the people in place that morning that we needed. While I waited in the ER for Carl to be tested and diagnosed, I remember just sitting there praying, God, give us the wisdom and give us the strength to face whatever lies ahead of us today or in the future. May you be honored and glorified through it all. In all honesty, I still really feared that I was going to lose my husband that day, and that I was going to be a single mom of 4. But at the same time, I felt an overwhelming peace, not necessarily that Carl was going to be okay, but that we were in his hands. God is sovereign. He had everything under control. He knew what we were about to face, and he had all of that worked out. Carl arrived at the ER before me because I had driven and followed. And so when they finally allowed me to back into the where he was, he said, I already told the doctor everything, and he said he thought it was, I don't remember. Okay, that's helpful. He said they're going to do a couple tests. And so the tests went very quickly. They did a chest x-ray, a CT scan, and another EKG. And the young doctor came back in, and he said, it's exactly what I thought. Carl has the classic textbook diagnosis of an aortic dissection. We have since read story after story after story of people who have had aortic dissections and have not been diagnosed quick enough or have not received care quick enough, and they have ended tragically. So I felt very grateful that that doctor was at that ER that morning. We also, where we live, could have ended up at various ERs that morning. but we ended up at Meredith. That would have been my last choice, honestly. Not necessarily because of any experiences there before, but just probably would have headed to Waynesboro, but we ended up there, and God knew that's where we needed to be that morning. Just a side note, many people were misinformed or just misunderstood Carl's diagnosis because it's not something that you hear of often. I don't know that we had ever heard of it before, but just to explain, an aortic dissection is when the aorta becomes diseased, it expands and it weakens the linings of the interior of the aorta. And when it becomes weakened, it can result in tears or what they call dissections. And then the blood can pass through those layers, forcing the layers apart even more. And it can cause a sudden onset of severe pain like Carl had. It can come in the back, the chest, or like Carl in the sternum and throat area. And Carl felt like that morning, like someone was just squeezing his neck, trying to choke him. That was the pain that he had. It can cause a complete aortic rupture, which can cause instant death. And it can also just cause lack of sufficient blood supply to other organs, which then leads to a stroke or an aneurysm or a heart attack, which could also be fatal if not caught early enough. Typical patients are males between the ages of 60 and 80 years old who have a history of high blood pressure, heavy smoking, or drug use, or connective tissue disease. Carl had no prior issues with any of these. We found out later that a bicuspid aortic valve can also be prone to aorta disease, and there's no documentation that they found that either. So Carl had no history of this, no warning signs beforehand of this. So the only link that we have at this point is possible genetic link. We found out after the fact that Carl's cousin, who died 10 years earlier, at the age of 43, which was Carl's age, passed away of this exact thing, and he died instantly with the dissection. Carl also lost his father at 62, and no autopsy was done because he had some lung issues, medications, could have caused, possible cardiac arrest or something like that. And so that left us wondering as well, things that are unanswered. But the ER doctor explained to Carl that he needed immediate open heart surgery and that he would need to be flown to Baltimore Shock Trauma Center for that. And that at this point, the goal was to get his blood pressure down, keep him calm and relaxed, so that he was ready for the flight, that the helicopter would be there in 25 minutes. And so that was our goal. He was not allowed to move a muscle. He also said that it was pretty cool when you can hear your ride approaching. And that lightened the mood for a moment, but I will say that the sight of a helicopter and the sound of a helicopter still makes my heart sink. It wasn't very cool that morning, I don't think. It brings back so many thoughts and fears from that day. And I had a huge regret. In the midst of our medical emergency, the kids had not said goodbye to Carl. They rushed into the gym because they knew the routine, they knew the place, they knew the people, and they knew that we were in an emergency situation. And I desperately hoped that the chaos of that morning was not the final time together as a family. I waved goodbye to a helicopter that day as I stood by my car in the parking lot of the ER of the Meredith Medical Center. And I quietly said, "I'll see you on the other side." I was desperately praying it would not be the other side of surgery. It would be the other side of surgery and not the other side of heaven. My sister-in-law, Heidi, stood with me that day. I had texted her just 30 minutes earlier. And her husband, Jerry, And they came immediately to the ER to pray with Carl and I and the medical team before the flight. And as we headed to Baltimore, she said, I got up this morning and had a really long to-do list. Monday mornings, they're like that. And I got the kids off to school and I didn't even know where to start. And I said, I'm going to go take a nap. And when I get up, I'll know what to do. And that's when I got your text. And I knew what to do. It wasn't a nap. It wasn't anything on that to-do list that morning. She didn't know, but God knew the agenda for the day. And what a God sighting that was. She sat with me for the next several hours. She drove me to Baltimore, something I didn't have to worry about and navigate. Halfway there, they called us at 1:10, said that Carl had arrived safely, that he was getting into the operating room at that time, and they would keep us updated. We arrived at the University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center in Baltimore, and I immediately checked into the receptionist at the surgery center waiting area, and she said, "Oh, you have a visitor." I have a visitor? I'm like, well, it must be Carl's brother, Daryl. They live not far away. I don't know who else could have possibly beat us here from Hagerstown. And so we sat down, and Steve Souter walked through the door. Steve had been in Baltimore that morning with clients when he had gotten the one call from church. He had hoped to get in and pray with Carl before the OR, but they were prepping him the entire way, and so he was not admitted. But he sat with my sister and I for at least the next 4 hours or so. He prayed for us, he talked to us, he helped pass the many hours that afternoon and early evening of waiting. And he graciously gave Heidi a ride home that night. That was a detail that we had not worked out when she drove my car down. We had no idea how she was going to get home. We'd figure that all out later. But God knew. God had these people in this place at this time, and what a God sighting that was. I had several other visitors that evening while I waited. My sister Deanna's family came, Dave and Glenda came, Carl's brother Daryl and his wife Nancy came, and like Steve and Heidi, my sister-in-law, these people didn't show up because they had nothing else pressing to do. There were a lot of issues that day, a lot of things on their plates, important, urgent, difficult, even emergent issues. There was a concussion that day. I believe there was a school lockdown or something similar. A lot of things that could have stood in the way, but these people showed up because they cared for us and our situation. And we got lots of texts and voicemails, and I know that you all were praying for us, and offers to help with our pets and our kids, and those messages and faces meant a lot, and they were recognized as God sightings because of the people that we had surrounding us. It helped pass the time for waiting. It helped encourage me. And at 10 p.m. that night, 13 hours after our emergency began, and about 8 hours after surgery started, Dr. Mirdad Qureshi came to meet us and give us our final update from the OR. This man had been through a 12-hour aortic dissection surgery, had come out and had gotten 4 hours of rest before he was called in for Carl's surgery. He looked like death. He was exhausted, but he said surgery was complete and he was pleased with the outcome. He said most aortas are about 2 centimeters in diameter. Carl's was 7.5. He was also extremely pleased that he was able to save Carl's heart valve. Carl related to me later that while on the operating table, Dr. Qureshi had asked if they needed to replace the valve, would he want titanium or a synthetic valve? Carl said, "Can I have a minute?" And he said, "Well, seconds." So Carl had made a decision alone while fighting for his life, and it was a decision that, fortunately, God had in control. He knew that that was not going to be an issue, but Dr. Qureshi told us that he firmly believed if Carl had ended up at any other surgery center in the nation, based on how emergent his case was, that they would have simply removed his valve and replaced it in an attempt to get him fixed as quickly as possible and in the best shape. But Dr. Grishy was able to keep the valve, and we're so thankful for that. Considering where we live, again, we could have ended up at so many different surgery centers. But Baltimore was the place to be with Dr. Grishy that day, and God knew He had the people and the places determined for us every step of that way. We also later found out at a follow-up appointment, we had never met Dr. Grishy since leaving the hospital. He has been in surgery every time we've been back. And the last doctor's follow-up that Carl had, he met with the doctor who trained Dr. Grishy, and he said, "This man is unbelievable. He's from Iran, and in Iran, I don't know what year it is in their high school year, they have to take a standardized test. And the year that he took the test, there were 1 million students. And out of 1 million students, we don't recall the exact number, but he scored in the top, I'm going to say 40. It was very high. God knew we needed that doctor that day. From the ER doctor that gave us a quick diagnosis to the surgeons in that room, he chose the best for us. And what a God sighting that was. Carl's recovery in the hospital and everything went extremely well. He has since follows some Facebook pages for aortic dissections and the complications that people have cause tragic endings, and Carl he did not have any complications at all. It's just unbelievable how smoothly it went. Backing up a little bit, about 2 years ago, I began praying for humility. There were several people in my life or women specifically, who I was watching do life and family and ministry, and I admire them for their humble spirits and godly wisdom, and I yearn for that in my own life. And I started praying, asking God regularly to give me humility, to help me recognize His work in my life and my family, and to give Him credit. And just last August, I remember one day praying, again, that prayer, and Lord, please don't make this prayer for humility too humiliating. I really don't want to be embarrassed. We were told that Carl would need 3 months off for recovery, and although it was a smooth one without complications, our medical expenses were becoming a concern over the next several weeks. Carl even says in the ER, he kept, racking, oh, well, this is going to cost how much? And when it got to the helicopter, he said, I gave up. Adding that up. And just to tell you, if you're looking for a flight with 3 other people in something the size of a VW Bug, a medical helicopter from Hagerstown to Baltimore will be a very good choice if you've saved up $50,000. We had not saved up that amount for that trip that morning. We had not prepared ourselves for this at all, and this is where my lesson in humility kicked in. I knew this was no longer going to be a quiet lesson. Recognizing that we were in over our heads with medical expenses was a sure sign that we were going to need to admit that we were no longer self-sufficient and we needed some help. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks after our CBS lesson, the Apply the Truth Again, was what obstacles are you facing? At this point, the Red Sea had been opened for the Israelites. And it said, what obstacles are you facing? What's standing in your way? What sea do you need opened up? Where is your faith? Where's your hope? In the same God that parted the Red Sea, He can make a way. So when the ladies from church asked me if they could help do a fundraiser meal, it was humbling to admit that we needed that, but with a lot of hard work and several ladies organizing it, lots of family and friends showed up at church on February 7th for a pot pie dinner and silent auction. it was humbling to see it unfold. And Carl's brother and wife came from Lancaster that night, and she said with tears in her eyes, "This is amazing. The amount of people that are here, you have a lot of people that care about you." And I jokingly said, well, when the Mennonites are going to make pot pie, people are going to show up. But in all honesty, it certainly was amazing because it took a lot of hands and a lot of work by a lot of people, and we had no idea what to expect. But over 34,000 was definitely not anything that any of us expected. That blew us away. What an amazing testimony of God's provision for our family. In our weaknesses, He is known, and His strength cannot be shown without that. In addition to the medical expenses, one of the huge concerns after his surgery was just a few weeks before all this happened, we had booked our flight for a visit to the Dominican Republic. We were to go in January. We used our Discover points to fly free, and we were mainly staying with former students of mine. But we like to rent a car for easy travel around the island, and we needed food and other expenses within the country, and we like to financially bless those students who we stay with. And so I was really concerned. It honestly was something that every day was heavy on me. Would Carl be healed medically, cleared for a trip by the beginning of January? Would we have to cancel and lose our money on the rental deposit? What about the appearances of this if we didn't cancel? People know he's off work. Word's getting around that we're starting to swim in medical debt. Fundraiser dinners being planned. How's that going to look when we run off to the Caribbean for 2 weeks? In the midst of all of this. And it really was bothering Carl and I. And we couldn't stop thinking, what horrible timing for this trip. Why? And I kept saying, well, we thought about going in October. That would have been worse. Thought about going over Christmas. Flights were too expensive then. But really, what poor timing. So we talked about it with several friends and family. And at Carl's November follow-up appointment, we were told that although he would not be clear for work by the beginning of January, he was healing so nicely that she had no concerns with us leaving on a trip. She felt like the heat would bother him, but really no concerns. And so as we discussed with family and friends, we heard over and over the same thing. It may seem like poor timing, but God knew. He knew you needed this time away with family. He knew you needed to reconnect with old friends. They've been praying for you too. They need to see what God has done. And so we decided to go. We made memories. We renewed relationships. We regained perspective and purpose. We refocused on our abundance of blessings. They were very happy to see us, to see how Carl had healed, to hear firsthand, because my Spanish may not be the best in relaying what was going on. But God, He worked out the timing of that trip. It was the last 2 weeks before Carl was to be released to go back to work. The last 2 weeks when he was feeling his best that we could go. Back to medical expenses and loss of work for Carl. We saw God provide for this even a year before this happened. Carl had crashed his big truck the day before Thanksgiving. That's a whole other story. He passed out. No one was around. The truck just laid over on its side. No injuries, but the truck was totaled. And Thanksgiving Day, Carl spent kind of thinking through, what am I going to do? No truck, no work. And so he went out on Black Friday, got a good deal on a new truck, started a new job the next week. And it worked out great while we waited for the slow insurance process of getting the money back. Carl's a dreamer, especially when it comes to trucks, and I don't always appreciate that. But uncharacteristically, the money came back and Carl did not invest it in any dreams. The insurance money was put away in our savings account, and he talked about it many times, things that we could use it for, but it was there. For a whole year, it was there. And so 3 months off of work to recover, we saw that God had provided an additional cushion for us just a year earlier. What a God sighting for sure. As for Carl's recovery, he would say he's almost 100%. He's read so many stories of aortic dissection patients who have spent months in the hospital with multiple complications, lost hopes of ever fully recovering, paralysis, just really tragic, sad stories. But he feels great. He looks great. And at one of his follow-up appointments in the fall, we had several hard questions to ask about what his future restrictions would be. He wasn't the typical patient, 60 to 80-year-old male. And so, and we didn't have answers as to why it happened other than the possible genetic link. And so she right off the bat said, well, there's a 50-pound weight restriction for life. We had a 3-year-old at the time. That's barely picking up our youngest child. And Carl was raised on a farm. Other than a season of the harvest crew and working at a ski resort in Colorado, he's driven truck. Manual labor has been his life. And so that hit us kind of hard. And she looked at Carl and she said, I really don't know if you know how fortunate you are to still be sitting here. He also asked, Carl has the zipper, the typical open heart surgery scar, and he also has a scar this way across the top. And he said, what is this scar? And she said, that was a just in case. That was based on how emergent your case was. They cut you there for an extra access point. And they didn't need it. But you're really fortunate to still be here. The 2 scars are now reminders of all that God did to care for us. Carl's been back to work since the end of January. COVID gave him a slower schedule than normal, but he's had steady work since then. And we're grateful for his job and the way God provided for us in so many ways. We spent time thinking and praying for another job opening, and she mentioned, like, well, can't you just get another position in the business? And he's self-employed. I don't know if we can work up another position. So, Carl had a panic attack that day in the doctor's office, and she said, I really think that we've given you a lot today. You really just need to get out of here. You need some fresh air, and you're really fortunate. You look great, but I've given you a lot, and you can leave. And it was a quiet ride home, and I was concerned, what are we going to do? But the one thing she kept saying, too, is just listen to your body. You're just going to need to listen to your body. And what does that mean? He didn't have any signs up to this. How do you listen to your body? But he has learned to listen to his body. She said, if it hurts, don't do it. He cannot exert full force, bearing down, lifting something. He must be able to breathe through it. The aorta also diseases over time. And so in January, the doctor said, you look so good that to the untrained eye, you could hardly tell anything was done. He healed so well. So they will see him back in a year. In January, we'll go back, and they'll do another CT scan to see how the aorta looks. But it diseases over time, and so they will probably, if it still looks great, they will probably be able to extend his next follow-up appointment even longer than that. Carl says through it all, he felt extremely calm. He never feared that he was dying. He never feared complications. It's probably a good thing that we had never heard of an aortic dissection before, even though his cousin had died 10 years earlier, that we did not know the cause of death. He did not know the possible complications. We could just say that he was being naive, but we could also say that it was the prayers of many of you that kept him calm. A friend also asked me afterwards, Denise, I don't know how you stayed so calm that day. Every update you sent us, everything, you just seemed so calm. You just seemed, and I was not feeling extremely calm, but I did feel a sense of calmness from God, and I do believe that that was the prayers of many people who had us covered. God's sovereign. He knew what was to come. He knew what was lying ahead of us. And I think much like the Israelites, it's easy to say for the Israelites, it was hard getting out of Egypt. That was hard, all those plagues. But we entered the promised land. That was what we hoped for. That was what our goal was, and we made it. And if that's what the story is, we miss everything in between. And that's all that God had planned and worked out. That's all the details. That's all the God sightings. And so with our story, I kind of felt like the same. We could have said, wow, that Monday was really rough. So many things could have gone wrong. But Carl's healed. No complications. He feels and looks great. And that's the end of the story. But it's not. And everything that happened in between was God's sightings, and it was steps along the way that God had in place. And I thank you for the opportunity to share that. And I encourage other people, don't overlook, don't just look at the beginning and the end. There's so much that God's doing in between for us. And we need to really share all that he has done. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. What do you say after that? Just again, how God is and how faithful he is. Even with the God sightings, I know at Bible school that was a big thing for the kids, but that we can actually use that in our life, in our daily lives every day. So thank you, Denise and Carl, for all you went through to be able to share this time with us. Just in awe of how God worked. And I'm sure we all were too. Just again to know that he's in control. We all go through situations in our lives and not knowing if we're going to make it, but God gives us what we need through that time and when we need it. So thank you again for sharing, opening your hearts, opening up probably wounds and hurts that you didn't want to, but thank you again for doing that this morning. What time is it? I guess we'll just go ahead and close, or should we do another song? Okay. We'll just go ahead and close. Just trying to think if there's any other announcements. The pool will be open this afternoon if anybody wants to get into that. Sort of do whatever you want this afternoon. We need to be out of here by 5 o'clock this afternoon. Just make sure everything's picked up. For those in the motel rooms, just keep your key in on the table and the door unlocked. And those in the cabins, just make sure things are right there too. After the service, if you guys could help us, just pick up chairs and we can put them on the racks over here while we move the sound equipment off and all that. So that would be a great help. And even after the meal, if you guys would help tear down tables and chairs. We'll be down there too, but if you guys could help us with that, that would be a big help also. Any other announcements that I just thank you again for coming this weekend. Just again, it's always been a good time just to be out and enjoy the creation and just to be fellowshipping with other believers. So just thank you for each one that came out. I'm going to have prayer for the meal, and then we can head on down once we get things cleaned up here, and then just enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Just enjoy your time here, and it's been good. It's been good to be in God's house this morning. So let's bow for a word of prayer. Dear God, we just thank you again for this weekend, for this time that we can come apart from the normal routine life that we are in. Thank you, too, for the camp and just how it has meant to many of us as we has come and just been here and just to enjoy it. Just thank you, too, for the service this morning. Just thank you for the worship time and just for the time of being that Carl and Denise shared. Lord, my heart just goes out, but again, knowing that you are a great and awesome God. Just thank you for your helping them and just continue to be with them. Be with each of us as we leave this week or today and go home, and help us throughout this week that we will see God's sightings in the way that you will work in each of our lives. Thank you, too, for the food we're about to eat, and just bless it to our bodies and just give us strength to go out throughout the afternoon. Keep us safe as we're here and as we travel home, and just watch over each of us. In Jesus' name, amen.